Hello there, my name is Deirdre and I'm a library assistant here in Dooradoyle Library, but I'm also an art historian, and I thought it would be a nice idea to have a look at some Irish artists. So the group of artists that I've decided to focus on today is those that are so-called Irish Impressionists, and this refers to a group of artists that were put together for an exhibition in 1988 by Dr. Julian Campbell. So the term impressionist is also always a popular term because it refers to, of course, those well-known artists such as Renoir, Manet and Monet, etc. But the Irish impressionists were not really affiliated with those French impressionists. They were just a group of artists who had gone abroad to travel to learn about their art and to focus on their art, rather than those that had come before them who had mainly gone to Britain, such as artists like Daniel Maclise and William McGreevy. So the first of the Irish artists really that set the trend was Nathaniel Hone the Younger, and he travelled to France in 1852. He studied under Thomas Couture, who had been tutor to Manet among other people. The revolution in technical innovation and artistic practice over this period led to the development of the tube of paint, which was really revelatory because it meant that artists could go out and paint on plein air or in the open air because they had the tube of paint with them, rather than have to return to their studio and make up their pigments with their paints. So Hone returned to Ireland in 1872, and his interest in tone rather than pure colour, his broader, lighter style influenced by the French realist painter Camille Corot, and his mature, freer style undoubtedly had influence over the younger emerging artist who witnessed his work. He was a master of the medium from the start of his career. His best work is painted in rich liquid pigment. That means that he used a lot of mediums with his oils so that it created a nice flow to his paint. It was laid on thinly and boldly with that caressing ease which only comes through ceaseless effort. So he was a natural painter. With the mature technique, he may be noticed to have a tendency to simplification in subject and composition. So in other words, while the subject matter appears simple, there was a lot of master and craft behind it. And the first of his paintings we're going to look at here is Sunshine at Noon, which was painted in around the 1890s. There's no exact date. And this relates to his most famous painting, which we'll have a look at in a minute, Pastures at Malahide, which is located in the National Gallery of Ireland. While not identical in detail, it is, and the theme is familiar. A small group of cattle fill the foreground, with one other grazing in the distance. You see this over here, just in front of a small copse. So you'll see how similar it is to his Pastures in Malahide, which is one of his best known paintings. In this painting, the landscape extends to a sun-drenched field, you can see here, on the horizon line, whereas the previous painting, as you can see, is set in front of a glimpse of an estuary. Invariably, these paintings display a magnificent sky, so he was well renowned for painting his skies. As you can see again in Pastures in Malahide, you can almost feel the thunder or the rolling thunder coming towards you. In the National Gallery catalogue notes of 1991, Dr. Julian Campbell, who I referred to earlier, he talks about Malahide in a passage which is difficult to resist repeating. The subject is modest and captured with apparent ease and simplicity in subdued but rich colours. The painting shows Hone at the height of his powers in the bold, confident brushwork, the masterly balance of light and shadow, and the understanding of the changing Irish light. So as I referred to that these were called the Irish Impressionists, as you will know, French Impressionists were renowned for their light in their paintings, that their subject matter was in fact light rather than the actual individual objects that they painted within their paintings. So that's why in many ways the Irish Impressionists can be compared to the French Impressionists. The art critic Kenneth McConkie asserts that with Hone, nationality was not an issue, but his work is definitely comparable to his French contemporaries rather than English painting of this period. So when he says that nationality is not an issue, he's trying to say that this painting could have been painted in any country. As you can see from Camille Corot's French painting, Grazing in the Marshes, this is very similar in tone and style and subject matter to what Hone was painting. And as I've referred to previously, home worked under Camille Corot. They're certainly influenced by him. Now the second artist I'm going to have a look at is Aloysius O'Kelly. And this is called an Interior Brittany. So I mentioned that the artists, what their commonality was, that they travelled abroad, and that was mainly to Brittany, the north of France, or to Belgium. So here we have Aloysius O'Kelly, Interior Brittany, and this work is amongst the first of a series of Breton paintings produced by O'Kelly over a period of 50 years. The style and ambitious complexity of the composition suggests a date of 1876, just 2 years after his arrival in Paris, where he studied at the École de Beaux-Arts. It was the practice of the students to spend the summer months painting in the art colonies outside Paris. So many students made the long journey to Brittany, where living expenses were more affordable than elsewhere. It also offered picturesque villages, attractive fishing ports, splendid local costume, and a dramatic, rugged coastline. So there was always something there to paint. The scene is set in a small interior designed by O'Kelly in detail. In the corner is a bed box, the doors of which are decorated with wheels and spindles of the type found in Pointe-Aven. Now I know this painting is not particularly clear because of the image, it's pixelated, but this is what they're talking about here. It's a bed box, so the bed to fold down. Okay, the woodwork of the crockery rack is similar. So this is here, the crockery rack, similar. On top of this sits a coloured glazed bowl. Again, it's not very clear, but I guarantee it's there. Similar to one that sits on the shelf above the fireplace. So this would be over here. Here we also find a green oil lamp. Again, not particularly clear in this image, but it's there. A brown earthenware pot and a large pan. A fire tongue hangs from the front of the shelf. So that's down here. O'Kelly set himself an intricate challenge in combining three groups of figures in the combined space of this small room. So it's only a small room, but there's an awful lot going on within it. Three men engaged in conversation sit around the table. See them here. One man tilts his head back to drink. Another has his back to us and sits beside a travelling sack on which rests a walking stick. So you can just barely make out the walking stick here. Perhaps he has arrived with a man in a similar colour costume who stands with his back to the fireplace. So you see here, they both have the same kind of costume. So he's standing with his back to the fireplace as if he's warming himself after a long journey. Perhaps they are friends or relatives visiting from another village. We don't know, but you can make a story, you can make a narrative out of the painting. The young man has just returned from hunting, carrying a rifle and satchel. He presents his quarry to the woman who was about to prepare a potage, or you could see stew here. She's all her vegetables here. She's just waiting for the game to arrive. On the floor is a branch with leaves and berries, perhaps for use as flavouring. Over here. In the dark recesses of the fireplace, we can see the faint outline of the cooking rack. So it's very dark recesses, as you can imagine, but in there you can imagine the big cooking pot waiting for the food to go in. To the left of this we find a fire stand and a bellows. O'Kelly uses the black of the fireplace to highlight the woman's headdress. So you can see that this is really accentuated, her white headdress, because the background is black. So he's using all of his techniques to accentuate and make a statement within his painting. His most famous painting is probably, in terms of Irish painting, Mass in the Connemara cabin in 1884. In 1884, Aloysius O'Kelly's Mass in the Connemara cabin became the only painting of an Irish subject ever to be exhibited at the prestigious Paris Salon. In subsequent years, it was also exhibited and well received in London and New York before vanishing at the end of the 19th century. The painting remained missing for 100 years before turning up mysteriously hidden in the priest's house, St. Patrick's Parish in Edinburgh's Cowgate. The mystery of O'Kelly's most famous painting, missing for a century, is entirely in keeping with the mystery of the painter himself, because although we have dates for Aloysius O'Kelly, circa 1853 to 1941. We're not sure actually when he died. There's kind of a discrepancy there in the dates. But I'll tell you a little bit about him. Aloysius O'Kelly and his family were steeped in revolutionary politics. His three brothers, James, Stephen and Charles, were all Fenians and artists, and his sister Julia married into the family of James Stephens, the founder of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Following the failed rising of 1867, his brother James and Stephen were exiled to New York. During this period, Aloysius moved to Paris using his brother's passport, immediately making contact with James Stephens and began studying at the École des Beaux-Arts. So maybe that's where the discrepancy in his age comes into it, because he was actually using his brother's passport. In the early 1880s, O'Kelly returned to Ireland, having been appointed special artist to the Illustrated London News. This position allowed him to visually capture the bleak existence of working class people on the west coast of Ireland in the aftermath of the famine and the subsequent agrarian unrest, the rise of the Irish National Land League, and political and social upheaval. It was during these turbulent times that O'Kelly produced this painting, Mass in a Connemara Cabin. The painting is said to be an example of peasant piety, and as the name suggests, it certainly deals with piety, capturing parishioners crowded into someone's home as a young priest says Mass. So you can see again, he has captured the whole pietic or the sacrificial, or I'll say it in a minute, sacredness of the people within the cabin. However, it is also possible to read the painting differently, to, as it were, offer a Republican reading of O'Kelly's work. Against the backdrop of the land war and the struggle between tenants and landlords, the holding of Mass was often a precursor for social and political gatherings. So this can be read as being kind of a camouflage, if you like, for more underlying developings going on. Given the social aspect of the Mass could suggest that they almost seamlessly facilitated the transition from socialising to politicising. In other words, the significance of the Mass may not be the Mass itself, but what comes next, what is unseen, anticipated. So the single image captures the past and at the same time suggests a future. O'Kelly chooses not the consecration of the Eucharist as the most significant moment in the Mass, but instead the final blessing. So it's like you're waiting for what comes afterwards. When the priest points the people towards the people as he makes the sign of the cross, perhaps pointing us towards the political and social events which would follow a Mass in the west of Ireland during this period. Such a political and subversive reading of the painting would certainly be consistent with O'Kelly's politics and with the mood of the times. There are other hints of political meetings too. The priest's top hat sits on the chair. See it here? The priest is young, yet everyone is prone before him. The top hat represents his power within the community, power that comes from his clerical position, not through experience or wisdom. It has been suggested that this painting itself, or the cabin itself, may be the home O'Kelly rented in the area. Certainly the location places the painting in the tumultuous political times outlined, and also geographically locates the work in a part of Ireland which was proved productive to artists. So that is a very interesting painting, and the fact that it was missing for so long and then found hidden in the priest's house kind of gives you kind of an inkling into what was suggested by O'Kelly. Now the next artist I'm going to look at is personally one of my favourite artists. He's called Frank O'Mara. And he's not that well known. Well, initially he was not that well known until Julian Campbell sort of brought him into the realm of the Irish Impressionists. His dates are 1853 to 1888, so he was very young when he died, and that kind of adds to the melancholy about his life, which I think is also reflected in his paintings. So Frank O'Mara was a Tipperary man. Though he may not have been directly influenced by Hone, he left for Grez-sur-Long, near where Hone was based, less than 3 years after Hone had lived there. He associated with many artists there where he was free to depict nature in an ideal rustic setting. O'Mara, who was one of the least known Irish artists of the period, possibly due to his limited oeuvre and short life, has in recent years gained a high respect and approval for his sensitive, melancholic but highly atmospheric paintings. He was the youngest of 7 children and born in Carlow. I think I said he was from Tipperary, but he's actually born in Carlow. His father was a medical doctor, and his grandfather, Dr. Barry Edward O'Mara, was in fact Napoleon's physician in St. Helena. Now this is the Old Maid at Grez. In 1875, O'Mara first visited the artist colonies of Barbizon and Grez-sur-Long on the edge of the forest of Fontainebleau. Revisiting Grez each summer, he decided to settle in the village, becoming one of the most colourful bohemian figures there. Old Maid at Grez is unusual in O'Mara's oeuvre as a landscape lacking in human figures. O'Mara represents a sturdy stone mill amongst trees beside a river. So if you think it looks faint, on the image looks faint, that is deliberately because it is a faint image. It's thinly applied paint. It's almost a ghost-like quality, which I will explain as we go on. In the background, a bridge can be seen, Grez-sur-Long, which you probably see also in a lot of John Lavery paintings because he painted there at the same time. O'Mara captures the sad moment of the day after the sun has set and the colours have been drained out of the landscape. The treatment of the reflections in the water and the use of subdued tones, silvery greens, greys and browns all add to the evening atmosphere and melancholy autumnal mood that were to characterise O'Mara's fine riverside landscapes at Grez in the 1880s. So you'll see this repeated in more of his paintings as we go along. The sombre tonality, handling of paint and use of impasto means really thick paint, applied in various places. The impasto in certain areas would suggest that Old Maid at Grez is an early work, probably painted in the late 1870s. The treatment of the sunset, you can just barely see the sun going down here, the yellow rim of light above the horizon and among the trees, and the off-white blocks of paint at the base of the mill, a wall or fence perhaps along here, are distinctive. In later canvases, O'Mara's paintwork grew thinner and more transparent, but here the colour is also enriched by the glowing Corot greens on the riverbank. If you remember the very first painting we did of Nathaniel Home, and then we showed the influence that Camille Corot had had on his work, and the greens in the painting along here, you can see that replicated in O'Mara's painting. The russet shades of the leaves and the touch of orange on the roof of the shed here. The presence of the riverbank in the foreground serves to frame the composition, so you'll see it here, and give a sense of depth to the scene. So because the river is here and the mill is at the back, you get that sense of perspective. O'Mara seems to have been drawn to river scenes from his early days, and conceivably the painting could be a mill scene on the River Barrow, near his hometown in Carlow, but most likely it is a French landscape of the mill and bridge at the village Grez-sur-Long near Fontainebleau, because we have seen it in other paintings by other artists at that time. O'Mara was living here circa 1875 to 1888, and the majority of his pictures were painted here. In 1888, he produced the first of his so-called reverie paintings, Autumnal Sorrows, and this again was at Grez. Here he introduces the themes that were to occupy him for the next 10 years, the figures of the women beside the River Long in a wooded autumnal landscape. Autumnal Sorrows shows a stylized version of the bridge at Grez. Remember we saw it previously, we captured a little bit at the corner. Here we can see more of it, beside which 2 women are conversing within a twilight gloom. The presence of the 2 women adds to the sad evening mood, and O'Mara shows particular sensitivity to the evening light which glows behind the wood and above the rooftops of Grez. See it here, the evening light just coming through the trees. There appears to be a mixing of phrase within the work, as it is difficult to imagine the women's old-fashioned mop caps as contemporary dress. This mixing of styles, such as pre-Raphaelite and realism, led O'Mara to more modern reverie paintings. So if you look at this, the clothing and the stance of the women is very reminiscent to any pre-Raphaelite paintings, particularly those done by Edward Burne-Jones. And you can see the influence within the figure and, as I said, the stance, the kind of melancholy tones. So the mixing then is more prevalent in these paintings. This is one of my favourite paintings, I have to say. Now this woman, while she looks as if she's just appeared out of nowhere, literally appeared out of nowhere, she is a common model within Connemara's paintings. So obviously the scene is actually deliberately set up, but it has made it look spontaneous. So mixing of styles such as pre-Raphaelite and realism led O'Mara to more modern reverie paintings, of which Twilight, 1883, is a prime example, characterised by the setting of an old woman by the water's edge, the dim autumn landscape and low wintry sun. Realism lies in the seemingly accidental meeting of the artist and old woman as she leans against the gate, accentuating the solemnity of the occasion. This, together with the air of poverty exuding from her stooped figure, omits a feeling of extreme loneliness and helplessness in the viewer. The qualities of Twilight still impressed a writer when he saw it in Glasgow in 1915, some 30 years after it was painted. O'Mara's sensitiveness is revealed alike in the handling and in the mood of the humble epic he wrote. O'Mara takes extreme care composing and drawing his paintings, applying his paint in delicate touches thinly and sparingly. So you can see the way the landscape is immersed in the woman. It's almost as if she's become part of it herself. You can see it actually literally going through her. So O'Mara concentrated intensely on his subjects and worked slowly in sombre mood. He frequently captured a rather melancholic solitariness, which probably reflected his own failing energy and increasing poor health, and he returned to Ireland and died shortly thereafter of malaria in 1888, which is why his work was relatively unknown for many years and his output was small. But there's some work that you can see in the Hugh Lane Gallery in Dublin, which actually shows his fiancée, and it's a beautiful painting. So if you're interested in seeing it close up, I'd recommend that you go and visit the Hugh Lane. So that's all for this part, and we'll be back in the second part to look at some more artists. Thank you.